Maurice had always loved his downtime. When the restaurant doors closed, the chairs were stacked, and the last dish was dried and put away, he would sit in a dim corner with a soothing cup of chamomile tea. For an hour or two, he could finally read a good novel, or maybe flip through an old spiral-bound cookbook from his grandmother. Everyone who worked with him respected his dedication. From dawn until dessert, Maurice was unstoppable. He had a keen sense of flavor combinations, an unwavering focus, and a staff who recognized his genius. But what no one in his bustling bistro knew, what not even Maurice himself realized, was that his day's labor did not end when he closed his eyes. The problem started quietly enough. At first, he would wake up in the middle of the night lying on the living room couch. He'd be a little surprised. He could have sworn he fell asleep in his bedroom, but shrugged it off. Then he began discovering small, inexplicable messes in his kitchen. An empty jar of olives was left on the counter, or a bowl of flour was sitting in the sink. He assumed he'd been absent-minded before bedtime. Overworked chefs often do odd things when exhausted, he reasoned. But the real puzzles began a month later, when he found a tray of half-formed dumplings on his stovetop. They had obviously been lovingly crafted, shaped into perfect crescents, but they were raw. "I don't remember making these," he mumbled. Nevertheless, he tossed them out and continued with the day's chores. The next incident was slightly more alarming. He discovered a coconut lime mousse chilling in his refrigerator at 6:00 a.m., frothy and fresh. His confusion was absolute. Not only did he not recall whipping up mousse, but it showcased the exact swirl technique he used on special occasions. "Am I cooking in my sleep?" he joked to himself. But the thought made him feel uneasy. His staff swore they knew nothing about nighttime visits to the restaurant, so it had to be happening in his own home kitchen. It became impossible to ignore the truth. Maurice was apparently sleepwalking and cooking elaborate dishes without any conscious awareness. Since he never felt groggy upon waking, he assumed it wasn't a health hazard, but he decided to investigate. He set up his phone to record the kitchen overnight. The camera captured mesmerizing footage of him shuffling into the room in his pajamas, eyes half open, pulling out bowls and measuring cups with purposeful movement. It was bizarre to watch. He didn't appear to be fully awake, yet his culinary instincts took over. He whisked with confidence, sprinkled salt as if choreographed by muscle memory, and occasionally hummed lullabies while waiting for water to boil. In the morning, though, it was all a blur. If not for the video evidence and the bizarre plates of half-eaten sleep creations on his counter, Maurice might have believed he was losing his mind. He tried everything to prevent these midnight cooking sessions. He set multiple alarms that would jolt him out of bed. He locked the kitchen door, only to discover the next morning that he'd apparently picked the lock with a prying screwdriver from his utility drawer without any recollection. He told himself, "I need help." Unfortunately, the nearest sleep specialist had a 9-month waiting list, so Maurice had to figure out a strategy on his own, or at least mitigate the mess. One Friday night, after the last customers left his restaurant, he pulled aside Karina, his most trustworthy sous chef. "Karina," he began in a hushed tone, strained with embarrassment, "I need to show you something weird." He then shared the phone video of his sleep cooking spree. Karina watched with widened eyes and an ever-evolving expression that shifted from shock to curiosity, ending in a stifled snort of laughter. "Chef," she said, "this is simultaneously the strangest and most fascinating thing I've ever seen. You look like a puppet on invisible strings, but you're cooking with even more grace than you do during the day." Maurice rubbed his temples. "I was hoping you could help me. Maybe come to my house, watch me, stop me from doing anything crazy." Karina, who had an affinity for bizarre occurrences, readily agreed. She even seemed excited by the prospect. "Just to witness it," she whispered conspiratorially. That night, Karina parked on Maurice's couch. She tried reading a novel, but her eyes kept flitting to the cracked door of the bedroom. At around midnight, she heard a faint squeak from behind the bedroom door. She tiptoed and peered in. Maurice was stirring. He sat up, swung his legs out of bed, and walked straight for the kitchen in a determined posture that would have fooled anyone into thinking he was wide awake. Karina felt goosebumps. She followed softly, flicking on a small lamp in the corner. Maurice, in a near trance, started rummaging through cabinets. He pulled out flour, sugar, cocoa powder, and eggs. Karina wondered if she should interfere, but Maurice appeared so skilled that she didn't want to break his flow, in part out of culinary curiosity. He whisked eggs with the sugar at lightning speed as though possessed by a pastry demon. The flour and cocoa formed a cloud around him, but he managed not to cough. Then he produced a splash of balsamic vinegar. Karina's eyebrows shot up. "What in the world?" she muttered. He was making something that resembled a chocolate cake batter, but why vinegar? In a flurry of movement, he poured the thick, chocolatey concoction into muffin tins. He rummaged his fridge and found pickled jalapenos. With mechanical precision, he dropped a single slice of jalapeno into the center of each muffin mold. Karina winced. Chocolate, balsamic vinegar, and jalapenos just felt like chaos for the taste buds. Maurice popped the tray in the oven and then rested against the counter, eyes half closed, humming a lullaby. Karina stepped forward. "Maurice?" she whispered. He turned to her, still clearly not awake, and murmured something unintelligible. Then he took a pinch of salt and sprinkled it in her direction, as if seasoning the air around her. It was one of the strangest moments Karina had ever experienced. After about 20 minutes, the oven beeped, and the chef retrieved the muffins. They smelled surprisingly tempting, a mix of sweet chocolate and tangy, vinegary undertones that teased the nostrils in a not altogether unpleasant way. Carefully, Maurice took a bite of one, nodded approvingly, then placed all the muffins on a rack to cool. Finally, he shuffled back to bed. Karina stared at the muffins in silence for a few seconds. Curiosity got the better of her. She broke off a small piece and tasted it. The flavors worked together in a weird, mind-bending harmony. The jalapeno gave it a spicy kick, and the balsamic vinegar provided a subtle tang. It was actually glorious. When Maurice awoke that morning, terrified he might have left the stove on or turned the kitchen upside down, he found Karina sipping coffee at his kitchen table, wearing an amused grin. "Good morning, chef," she said, gesturing at a plate of the chocolate jalapeno muffins. "Hope you're hungry." Maurice was both embarrassed and intrigued. The two of them discussed the best way to handle his bizarre condition. He wasn't quite sure if he should treat it like a menace or a brand new gastronomic opportunity. Karina suggested, "What if we actually harnessed your sleepwalking genius for a unique menu at the restaurant? Something you only create at night, then we replicate it by day under normal, fully conscious conditions." Maurice laughed, thinking she was joking, but Karina's eyes were serious. "Chef, these muffins are weird, but they're good. Weird. People like a twist." Maurice mulled it over. He was certain he wanted a remedy for his midnight antics, but until he found it, maybe he could at least salvage something from it. Why not? He decided to keep better records of every dish made in his sleep. He asked Karina to continue visiting on weekends, and occasionally he set up the phone camera on weekdays. He discovered that his midnight menus were extremely experimental. One night, he made a strawberry risotto garnished with shaved brie and ground espresso beans. Another night, he baked bread using a dough infused with black garlic, raisins, and saffron. It became a nightly carnival of tastes that, despite sounding insane, often resulted in surprisingly balanced, though occasionally horrifying, dishes. Within weeks, Maurice and Karina had collected 16 new recipes that were sure to captivate the adventurous foodies who frequented the bistro. Maurice decided to run a limited-time Nocturnal Delights section on the menu in homage to his unconscious creativity. Every day, he'd replicate these creations with eyes fully open. The response was immediate and explosive. Food bloggers swarmed, local critics scribbled glowing reviews, dazzled by the chef's readiness to take culinary risks. "Chef Maurice has outdone himself," wrote one food columnist. "He's pioneered the new frontier between dreams and dining." The reservations soared, and Maurice found himself, ironically, even more exhausted from the restaurant's success. But the strangest consequence was the groupies, who started showing up at his doorstep at night, hoping for a glimpse of the sleepwalking chef. It started with a few fans who politely knocked on the front door during dinner hours and asked if they could get an autograph. Soon, though, the truly zealous arrived after midnight, crouching behind hedges in the faint hope of catching him stirring sauce in his pajamas. "This is getting out of hand," Maurice grumbled, peeking through his curtains at gawking onlookers. Karina tried to install a fence for privacy, but they'd scale it. He thought about hiring a security guard, but that felt too dramatic. Instead, he posted a polite sign outside: "Please let the sleep chef rest no tours after 10 p.m." Some of the onlookers complied, while others remained defiant, though eventually the mania calmed a bit. Throughout it all, the nighttime cooking episodes continued. The recipes became riskier, more eccentric. One night he invented a lavender niçoise pasta, topped with banana slices and garnished with crushed peppermints. The following morning he woke up, found the pastel-hued dish on the counter, and recoil was his first reaction. "Oh dear," he muttered. Yet, after discarding the peppermints, it wasn't entirely hopeless. The lavender sauce was actually subtle, albeit an odd pairing with bananas. Maurice began to worry that the mania in the kitchen was escalating and might cross into disaster territory. "What if my night brain decides to flambe something and burns the whole house down?" he asked Karina. She too was concerned for his safety. They tried leaving notes around the kitchen: "You are asleep, do not turn on the stove." But in that trance state, Maurice disregarded them, tidying them away or scribbling over them. They removed all lighters, only to discover matches in his jacket pockets the next morning. In a truly comedic turn, they replaced the real stove knobs with plastic decoys, hoping he wouldn't figure out how to ignite the flames. Yet somehow, while slumbering, he improvised a solution involving the pilot lights hidden deep in the stove. Despite their best efforts, the chef of the night was unstoppable. As months passed, Maurice's staff began noticing strange fatigue in their beloved leader. He'd sometimes nod off mid-demonstration, dropping a whisk or dozing in the walk-in freezer for a quick, chilly nap. He had become Chef Nap-a-Lot. Karina insisted he see an actual doctor, but the earliest specialist appointment was still months away. In a last-ditch modicum of reason, Maurice decided to take a weekend off, something he rarely ever did, and invited Karina and a few close colleagues to stay at his place for a sleepover stakeout. The plan was to watch him in shifts, physically stopping him from cooking if necessary. So one Saturday night, 5 of them, Maurice, Karina, pastry chef Guillermo, line cook Helena, and busboy turned social media manager Ricky, gathered in Maurice's spacious living room. They brought pillows, blankets, snacks, and even board games to pass the time. The evening started fun, like a casual party. They chatted about the funniest customer complaints, the weirdest dish request, and the time a raccoon broke into the dumpster and ended up scaring the entire kitchen staff. But as midnight approached, the mood grew serious. They all turned their attention to Maurice. He yawned, declared he was exhausted, and asked if they were sure they wanted to keep watch. Everyone nodded. Maurice fell asleep on his bed, wearing an old t-shirt and well-worn pajama pants with cartoon lobsters on them. The rest of the group hovered in the hallway, occasionally joking about forming a human chain if he tried to bolt. Sure enough, at around 12:30 a.m., Maurice sat upright, swung his feet off the bed, and drifted toward the door. Guillermo whispered, "He's on the move." They scurried. Maurice, stumbling and half-lidded, made a beeline for the kitchen. Helena got ready to physically block him, but as soon as she touched his arm, he slipped past her with surprising agility. It was as if some unstoppable culinary force propelled his every step. He opened the fridge with authority. Guillermo tried to shut it, but Maurice paused, gave Guillermo a quizzical, glassy-eyed look, and reached around him to grab a tub of mascarpone cheese. He then sidestepped Helena and reached into the pantry for dried anchovies. Ricky, filming for posterity, whispered, "What is he making with mascarpone and anchovies?" Karina answered in a deadpan, "Probably something unholy." They let him proceed for a moment, just to see his intention. He grabbed potatoes, peeled them with lightning speed, then smashed them into a bowl with mascarpone, anchovies, and some fresh dill. The group stared wide-eyed. He added lemon zest, a dash of nutmeg, and then started rummaging for eggs and flour. "Is he making gnocchi out of that?" "Mixture?" Helena wondered, half impressed and half horrified. Maurice kneaded the dough-like substance and rolled out logs that he cut into small oval shapes. The smell was pungent and fishy, but with the tang of lemon and the coolness of mascarpone. Ricky struggled to remain quiet, so Guillaume tapped his elbow, reminding him not to disrupt the flow. Then, with a smooth pivot, Maurice turned to the stove. This was the dangerous part. Open flames. Karina carefully stepped in front of the burner. "No stove for you, Chef Sleepy," she whispered. Maurice blinked, seemingly confused. He reached for the knob. She gently moved his hand away. A faint flicker of frustration creased Maurice's brows. The tension rose. Then came an unexpected twist. Maurice turned to Guillermo, who was standing behind him, and simply stepped aside. He opened the cabinet beneath the sink, pulling out a portable electric burner that had been stashed there for emergencies. Everyone gasped. Clearly, the slumbering part of his brain had memorized the entire kitchen inventory. He set the burner on the counter, plugged it in, and placed a small pot of water on top. The group was flummoxed. "He is unstoppable," Karina muttered. They debated physically restraining him, but none of them felt comfortable forcibly holding their boss down, especially when he was so skillful with knives in any state of consciousness. Resigned to the reality they were witnessing, they stood by, ready to intervene if anything got too dangerous. Maurice salted the boiling water, dropped the gnocchi in, and waited. Within minutes, the bizarre anchovy mascarpone lumps floated to the top. The group braced themselves for the next step. Maurice turned off the burner and drained them. Surprisingly, he didn't attempt to sauté them in hot oil or flambe them. Instead, he gently placed them on a plate and topped them with a drizzle of honey. It was the final flourish that left everyone baffled. He took one bite, nodded, then stepped away, presumably satisfied. Karina reached for the plate. The anchovy aroma wafted up at her, but so did the sweetness of honey and the creamy tang of the mascarpone. Curiosity overcame her hesitation. "If it's gross, I'll spit it out," she rationalized. She popped one gnocchi in her mouth, her eyes turned pensive, and she shrugged. "Weird, but not terrible. In fact, kinda good in that sweet and salty dimension. I'll call it gnocchi dell'insegna." Ricky burst out laughing. "Insomnia gnocchi love it." One by one, the others tried a small piece, responding with variations of, "Huh, interesting," and "I wouldn't order this on purpose, but it's kind of fun." Meanwhile, Maurice, after finishing his single bite, wiped his hands on a dish towel, closed his eyes, and started walking aimlessly. They followed him back into the hallway, expecting him to return to bed. Instead, he veered into the laundry room. He pulled on a doorknob, revealing a closet, and stepped inside. Everyone watched in utter confusion as he curled onto the floor of the closet, hugging a spare pillow. By all appearances, he'd decided to sleep in there for the rest of the night. Helena chuckled softly. "I guess that's that." They let him be, draping a blanket over him. The group returned to the living room, whispering about the extraordinary incident they'd just witnessed. Throughout the next few hours, no more midnight expeditions occurred. Finally, at around 7 o'clock IEM, Maurice groggily emerged from the closet. He was bewildered. "Why am I in the laundry room?" he asked. Karina gave him a brief recap. He sighed. "Marascone anchovy gnocchi with honey? That's new territory, even for me." Ricky handed him a leftover piece. Maurice sniffed it, made a face, and pushed it away. "No thanks. That might be a bit too adventurous when I'm fully conscious." Over the following weeks, Maurice made small but key adjustments to limit the scope of his midnight cooking. He removed any flammable liquors from the house. He placed disclaimers on the restaurant menu that read, "Invented in a dream state, replicated by day," to quell any potential lawsuit if someone found a dish too shocking. He even started wearing fuzzy mittens to bed, hoping they'd slow him down with handling utensils. But still, the sleepwalking chef phenomenon persisted. His employees began noticing that in these dream recipes, there was always a kernel of brilliance wrapped in a layer of absurdity, a flavor combination that never would have surfaced in a wide-awake mind. Patrons lined up, ironically, for the strangest items: chocolate balsamic jalapeno muffins, strawberry espresso risotto, saffron black garlic raisin bread, and the new fan favorite, insomnia gnocchi. Despite the unpredictability, The once modest bistro bloomed with popularity, prompting national magazines to come call it. Journalists insisted on interviews, late-night talk shows extended invitations. "He's the unstoppable wizard of weird," proclaimed a trending article. But that level of fame made Maurice deeply uneasy. He had launched his restaurant with the goal of serving comfort food prepared with a hint of innovation, not forging a carnival of strange tastes for viral stardom. One day, he faced Karina in the quiet kitchen before the busyness began. "I don't want to be a novelty act," he said, exasperated. "Yeah, it's all fun and successful, but it's overshadowing everything else. People only want my midnight madness. They don't appreciate the simpler, heartfelt dishes I pour my day soul into." Karina gave him a warm smile. "Chef, there's room for both. The midnight madness might bring them in, but your everyday flavors will keep them coming back. You can be both the expert daytime maestro and the accidental nighttime experimenter." That idea brought some solace. Maurice continued to refine his normal menu as well, reintroducing comforting classics like braised lamb stew with herbs, or homemade ravioli stuffed with ricotta and spinach, or a triple chocolate layer cake that drew lines around the block. Patrons raved about both extremes, the dependable and the daring. The swirling hype finally started to feel sustainable, even beneficial. If the nighttime cooking insisted on continuing, at least he could direct it into something constructive. Still, the question remained, would he ever stop sleep cooking? He finally got his much-awaited appointment with the sleep specialist. He arrived armed with notebooks full of bizarre recipes, security camera footage, and testimonies from his staff. The doctor, an older woman with a calm, reassuring voice, listened intently. "I've seen a lot of cases of sleepwalking," she said, "but cooking, especially cooking quite elaborately, is a rarity." She recommended potential therapies, such as adjusting Maurice's schedule, certain dietary changes, and possibly medication to reduce the intensity of his sleep phases. Maurice, however, hesitated at any pill that might dull his creativity. "Let's start with the schedule adjustments and see if that helps," he decided. The changes were incremental. Maurice forced himself to leave the restaurant earlier, giving himself more downtime to unwind properly before bed. He avoided caffeine after noon, swapped out his usual post-dinner cappuccino for a mug of warm milk, and tried to do breathing exercises in bed. For a solid week, there were no new chaotic concoctions. He woke up feeling rested. The staff noticed the difference, remarking that he seemed more energetic, more focused. But ironically, around the seventh day, a loyal customer asked, "Chef, do you have anything from your dream kitchen tonight?" Maurice felt a pang of guilt that he couldn't offer a new nocturnal delight. Then came the next Monday. After a long but productive day, Maurice did his new bedtime routine of breathing exercises. He felt good, and soon he drifted into a heavy sleep. But in the middle of the night, the old habit reared its head. His eyes opened, vacant. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, trod into the kitchen, and rummaged around like a man possessed by a vision no waking mind could fathom. By dawn, he found on his table a delicate row of homemade churros, dusted with matcha powder and drizzled with honey lime syrup. Perched on top of each churro was a single blueberry, skewered on a tiny cocktail stick, shaped like a mini sword. The entire effect was whimsical, like a plated fantasy from a carnival in a galaxy far, far away. He took a timid bite. It tasted crisp and sweet, with a faint herbal note from the matcha. It was delightfully odd and definitely a new invention. Part of him was exasperated that the sleepwalking had resumed, while another part was relieved. Maybe this was just who he was, a chef day and night, conscious or otherwise. So he decided to accept it just for the time being and see what wonders might come from dreams. Karina's laughter lit up the kitchen when he brought in the new treat for her. "We can call it Churro de Midnight Madness," she said, nibbling the crunchy goodness. "We can even serve them in little sword stands, you know. Go all out." Maurice smiled sheepishly. "We'll put them on the menu tomorrow," he said. And so things continued in that bizarre equilibrium. By day, Maurice served up immediate crowd pleasers and personal classics. By night, he sidestepped reason in his slumber, a vessel for gastronomic improvisation. As months passed, he learned not to fear it, but to navigate it with prudence and creative acceptance. Now and then, he found new ways to safeguard his house from potential hazards, installing motion sensor alarms or timing devices that cut off the outlets at certain hours. Sometimes those measures worked, sometimes not, but each morning he awakened to fresh puzzle pieces, a new dish or a partial dish or an attempt that looked too frightening to taste. Yet even the flops contained glimmers of brilliance that inspired new ideas. Word spread far beyond the city, morphing Maurice into a culinary folk hero. People whispered about him in lines at grocery stores, describing him as a gentle wizard whose potions originated in the realm of sleep. Invitations rolled in for him to appear on cooking competition shows. Inevitably, the producers demanded he replicate his nighttime feats on camera, even though that was the one thing he knew he couldn't do while conscious. He politely declined, content with his life as it was, quietly chaotic, but brimming with possibility. In the end, Maurice discovered a surprising gift in what he once deemed a curse. His unconscious kitchenscapes complemented his daytime discipline, offering him a world of fearless experimentation that he could refine when fully awake. Guests at his restaurant never knew what new wonders might grace the menu, and his staff reveled in the creative challenge. As for Maurice, he still battled occasional drowsiness and embarrassment, especially on mornings he woke up on the laundry room floor or found anchovy-laced dough scraps in his hair. But the sleepwalking chef had learned to embrace the madness, forging a harmony between pragmatic technique and dream-fueled abandon. He never did figure out precisely why he started cooking in his sleep. There was no neat medical summary that pinned it all down. Yet sometimes, in a half-lucid moment past midnight, he felt like he could sense the beating heart of creativity thrumming through him, pushing him to mix flavors he'd never dare try if he were awake. It was as if a whole different side of his imagination was only accessible in that twilight state, free from the constraints of logic. Night after night, that side whispered to him, "Come to the kitchen, create something extraordinary." And so he did. Over and over again, living two culinary lives in a single body, one told in the bright lights and crowded chatter of the bistro, and the other whispered in the hush of moonlit nights, guided by gentle snores and improbable flavor combinations. Friends and admirers would gather around his next morning creations, scratching their heads and venturing a taste, discovering each time that, sometimes, madness makes the meal, just as sometimes the funniest stories are the ones we stumble into without meaning to. And Maurice, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, would smile and think, maybe tonight I'll dream up something even weirder.